Most people aren't broken. They're unfinished. Not because they lack potential, but because they avoid one thing. And the longer they avoid it, the more their life quietly collapses from the inside. Most people spend their entire lives trying to fix what feels wrong on the surface, habits, relationships, careers, while completely ignoring the fracture underneath. They work harder, distract more, optimize everything, and still feel incomplete. That emptiness you can't explain. It's not failure, it's fragmentation. As Jung warned, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. And that avoidance is the real reason wholeness feels so rare. Here's the counterintuitive truth no one tells you early enough. The parts of you that scare you, slow you down, or feel uncomfortable are not obstacles to your growth. They are the doorway. Wholeness doesn't come from adding more to your life. It comes from integrating what you've been running from. And once you understand this, everything changes. How you make decisions, how you relate, how you experience meaning. In this video, you're going to see why comfort quietly sabotages identity, why distraction feels safer than truth, and why pain keeps returning until you finally listen. More importantly, you'll discover a clear path toward integration. Practical, human, and deeply grounding. Not theory, not motivation. A way back to yourself. If you've ever felt successful but empty, strong but tired, or productive yet disconnected, this isn't an accident. And by the end of this journey, you'll understand exactly why and what to do about it. You don't avoid the mirror because you're broken. You avoid it because it tells the truth without softening the edges. Every time life slows down, you feel that itch to scroll, to drink, to stay busy. That's not laziness. That's avoidance wearing a polite disguise. Deep down, you sense that wholeness asks for self-awareness, not performance. And performance feels safer than silence, right? So you run, like most people do, not from pain, but from meaning. The soul doesn't shout, it waits. And waiting can feel unbearable when you've built an identity on noise. That's where this quiet fracture begins. Think of your inner world like an unfinished house. You live comfortably in the front rooms, achievements, routines, roles. But there's a locked room in the back, dusty and avoided. Inside it lives your shadow, your fears, your unspoken desires. Avoidance tells you you'll deal with it later. Later becomes years, then decades. Integration never happens by accident. It happens by confrontation. Jung warned that what you don't face rules you invisibly. That's how identity slowly slips out of your hands. Not with drama, with delay. You might notice it in small ways first. A strange emptiness after success, a dull ache during quiet moments. You check all the boxes, yet something feels off. That's the soul knocking from the inside. Pain isn't punishing you. It's signaling misalignment. Self-awareness always begins with discomfort. Like adjusting your eyes in a dark room, it stings before it clears. Most people turn the lights back off immediately. Transformation asks you to stay a little longer. Just long enough to see. Here's something practical and deceptively simple. Create 10 minutes a day with zero distraction. No phone, no music, no productivity excuse. Just a notebook and one question. What am I avoiding? Write without editing, without being clever. You'll feel resistance. That's the doorway. This practice builds wholeness the way lifting builds strength. Slow, uncomfortable, undeniable. It trains you to sit with your own reflection, and that skill changes everything. Most people think avoidance keeps them safe. In reality, it keeps them fragmented. The longer you run, the louder the soul gets. Distraction loses its power over time, and one day, life corners you through burnout, loss, or silence. That's when the mirror shows up uninvited. The question isn't if you'll face it, it's when and under what cost. Because once the flight ends, the shadow steps forward, and that's where the real work quietly begins. You don't pay the price of avoidance all at once. You pay it in installments, quietly, almost politely. A little numbness here, a little irritability there. A life that looks fine on the outside, but feels strangely hollow inside. That's the hidden cost most people never calculate. What you refuse to face doesn't vanish. It relocates. It moves into your decisions, your relationships, your habits. Soon, you're reacting instead of choosing. That's not fate. That's fragmentation running the show. And it happens faster than you think. Avoidance works like credit card debt for the soul. At first it feels helpful, even smart. You postpone pain, delay discomfort, keep things manageable. But interest accumulates in the background. Anxiety grows without a clear cause. Your identity becomes reactive, not intentional. You start saying yes when you mean no. You chase validation because self-awareness feels risky. Eventually, the bill comes due, always. And it never arrives with a warning label. You can see this price in everyday life. Someone who can't be alone without noise. Someone who keeps changing jobs, partners, cities, same patterns, new scenery. Someone who's successful yet restless, admired yet disconnected. That's what happens when the shadow is ignored. It leaks out sideways through anger, sarcasm, exhaustion. The soul finds expression whether you approve or not. Integration is the only way it speaks calmly. Without it, life becomes a constant negotiation with yourself, and that's exhausting. Here's a grounded way to interrupt this cycle. Start tracking emotional reactions instead of suppressing them. When something triggers you, pause and ask, what is this protecting? Anger often guards pain. Perfectionism often hides fear. Procrastination often masks self-doubt. Write these patterns down for 1 week. You'll begin seeing the architecture of your avoidance. That's self-awareness turning on the lights. And once you see clearly, you can't unsee. Most people think wholeness requires adding more habits, more knowledge. In truth, it requires subtraction. Removing the lies you've told yourself to stay comfortable, letting go of identities built purely on approval, facing the discomfort you've been outsourcing to the future. That's when transformation stops being abstract. You feel stronger, not lighter, stronger. Because you're no longer divided against yourself. And just as you begin to sense this inner shift, you'll realize there's one place you've avoided most of all. There's a part of you that was quietly labeled off-limits a long time ago. Not because it was evil, but because it was inconvenient, too emotional, too intense, too honest. So you learned to close that door early. You became skilled at functioning, adapting, fitting in. But the soul doesn't disappear when ignored. It becomes the forbidden room inside your inner house. You walk past it every day pretending it's not there, yet somehow you always feel its presence, like a draft you can't explain. Carl G. Jung understood this deeply. He saw the soul as the totality of who you are, not just the polished parts. Instinct, longing, fear, creativity, darkness, intuition, all included. But society rewards control, not integration. So you were trained to edit yourself for acceptance. That's how identity fractures without you noticing. You keep the socially acceptable rooms clean and bright. Meanwhile, the forbidden room collects pressure, and pressure always seeks release, usually in ways you don't consciously choose. You feel this when life slows down unexpectedly. A quiet Sunday afternoon, a sleepless night, a moment alone after a big achievement. Suddenly, there's restlessness, discomfort, even sadness. That's not weakness. That's the soul asking for airtime. Most people rush to fill the silence. Scroll, snack, stream, distract, anything to avoid opening that door. Because once you enter, you can't pretend anymore. Let's make this practical, not mystical. Pick one creative or reflective outlet and use it weekly. Writing, drawing, long walks without headphones, journaling by hand. Not to produce something impressive, but something honest. If writing helps, start with Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. Not to copy ideas, but to remember depth exists. Let the soul speak in fragments if it wants. You're not solving it, you're listening. That act alone begins integration, and integration restores wholeness. Here's the paradox most people miss. The forbidden room isn't where your worst parts live. It's where your power has been locked away. Your intuition, your emotional intelligence, your creative fire. By avoiding it, you don't stay safe. You stay small. The soul doesn't want to destroy your life. It wants to correct its direction. But correction requires courage. And once you feel that courage rising, you'll start questioning the very comfort you've been protecting. Comfort feels like safety, but it's a clever illusion. It whispers, "Stay here, don't rock the boat." And at first, that voice sounds reasonable. You build routines that protect you from discomfort. Same habits, same thoughts, same emotional responses. Soon your life runs on autopilot. Nothing is technically wrong, yet nothing is truly alive. That's the silent danger of comfort. It doesn't hurt you loudly, it slowly puts you to sleep. Integration, on the other hand, requires friction, not chaos, tension, the kind that stretches you without breaking you. Like muscles growing under resistance, the psyche evolves through challenge. When you avoid discomfort, you avoid self-awareness. When you chase comfort, you freeze identity in place. That's why growth often feels inconvenient. It asks you to question habits that once felt normal. It exposes patterns you'd rather keep invisible, and that's exactly why it works. Look at how comfort shows up in daily life. Staying in conversations that feel empty. Keeping a job that drains you but pays the bills. Avoiding hard truths in relationships to keep the peace. Each choice seems small, harmless, but together they form a life built on suppression. The shadow doesn't disappear. It adapts. It turns into resentment, apathy, quiet anger. This is how people lose themselves politely, with a smile and a schedule. Here's a grounded experiment you can try. Once a week, choose one intentional discomfort. Speak a truth you've been rehearsing silently. Set a boundary that makes your voice shake a little. Change one habit that no longer serves your growth, not dramatically, deliberately. Notice how alive you feel afterward. That aliveness is your compass. It points toward integration, toward wholeness. Comfort promises peace but delivers stagnation. Integration promises tension but delivers freedom. One keeps you manageable, the other makes you real. Most people never choose consciously, they drift. But drift always has a direction, and slowly comfort becomes a cage disguised as routine. Once you see this, you can't unsee it. And that realization naturally leads to one question. What happens when the mask you've relied on starts cracking? At first, the mask feels useful. It helps you adapt, succeed, belong. You learn which parts of yourself get approval and which don't. So you highlight the acceptable traits and dim the rest. No one tells you this is dangerous. In fact, you're rewarded for it. You become reliable, strong, easy to deal with. But beneath that polish, something subtle happens. You stop asking who you are. You start asking who you should be. The mask isn't a lie, it's a survival strategy. As a child, it keeps you safe. As an adult, it keeps you stuck. Over time, repetition turns the mask into habit. Habit turns into identity. You no longer feel like you're performing. You feel like this is just you. That's the quiet danger. When the mask fuses with identity, self-awareness fades, and wholeness becomes hard to remember. You might recognize this in moments of exhaustion, not physical tiredness, existential fatigue. Being on all the time drains something deeper. You laugh at jokes you don't find funny. You agree when your body says no. You play roles instead of expressing truth. The shadow watches patiently from behind the mask, not angry, waiting, because everything unexpressed eventually demands space, usually when you least expect it. Here's a practical way to loosen the mask without blowing up your life. Start noticing when your energy drops after interactions. Ask yourself, what did I not say? What did I suppress to stay acceptable? Write down recurring patterns. You'll see where the mask is heaviest. Then choose one low-risk space to practice honesty. A trusted friend, a journal, a private voice note. Truth doesn't need an audience to be powerful. It just needs permission. The mask cracks not through rebellion, but through awareness. You don't rip it off. You outgrow it. As self-awareness deepens, performance loses its grip. You begin to feel relief in being real, not louder, truer. That's when integration quietly begins. But once the mask loosens, another challenge appears, because behind it lives something you were taught to fear, not weakness, intensity. And meeting that intensity means finally turning toward the shadow. The shadow isn't the worst part of you. It's the most rejected. It's made of impulses you were told to hide, emotions you learned to censor, anger that felt dangerous, desire that felt inappropriate, confidence that felt too much. So you pushed those parts underground, not healed, buried, but buried things don't die. They wait, and they gain strength in the dark. Here's the uncomfortable truth most people avoid. What you deny doesn't make you good, it makes you unconscious. You don't become kind by suppressing anger. You become passive-aggressive. You don't become humble by denying power. You become resentful of those who express it. The shadow leaks through tone, sarcasm, overreactions. That's why some moments feel out of proportion. It's never just about what's happening now. It's about what's been silenced for years. Carl G. Jung made this clear. The shadow isn't evil. It's raw life energy without guidance. Like fire without a hearth, it either warms or burns. When ignored, it destroys quietly. When integrated, it becomes strength, clarity, boundaries. Your anger can become protection. Your ambition can become direction. Your desire can become creativity, but only if you're willing to look at it without judgment, not to act it out, to understand it. Let's make this practical and grounded. Next time you judge someone intensely, pause. Ask yourself, what part of me is reacting here? Strong reactions are mirrors, not accidents. If someone's confidence irritates you, where do you shrink yourself? If someone's anger scares you, where do you swallow yours? Write these observations down. This isn't self-criticism, it's self-awareness. You're mapping the shadow, not fighting it. And mapping gives you choice. Most people fear the shadow because they think it will consume them. In reality, avoidance gives it power. Integration takes it back. When you name what's been hidden, it loses its grip. You feel more whole, not darker. More grounded, not chaotic. This is how wholeness actually forms, through inclusion, not purity. And once the shadow stops sabotaging from behind the scenes, something surprising happens. Pain itself starts speaking differently. Pain isn't your enemy, even though it feels like one. It's more like an alarm system that won't shut up until you listen. Most people treat pain as a flaw to eliminate, so they numb it, outrun it, intellectualize it. But pain doesn't disappear when ignored. It changes shape. It turns into anxiety, bitterness, exhaustion. That's not cruelty, that's communication failing. Pain speaks the language of attention, and it gets louder when you pretend not to hear. Think of pain like smoke in a building. You wouldn't curse the smoke for being annoying. You'd look for the fire. Emotional pain works the same way. It points to misalignment between who you are and how you're living. When you suppress it, you stay inside the burning structure. When you listen, you find the exit. Self-awareness begins when you stop asking, "How do I make this stop?" and start asking, "What is this trying to show me?" That shift alone changes everything. You can see this in everyday experiences. Burnout often signals values being ignored. Loneliness often reveals emotional avoidance. Restlessness often exposes a life built on expectations instead of meaning. Pain is specific if you slow down enough. It doesn't speak in paragraphs. It speaks in sensations. A tight chest, a heavy stomach, a racing mind. These are messages, not malfunctions. Your body is often more honest than your thoughts. It notices truth before your mind is ready. Here's a simple practice that builds integration fast. When discomfort shows up, name it without judgment. Say, "This feels like fear," or "This feels like grief." Then ask one grounded question: what boundary is missing here? Pain often points to where you've overextended or betrayed yourself. Maybe you need rest, honesty, or distance. Take one small corrective action within 24 hours. Cancel one draining commitment. Speak one honest sentence. Action tells the soul you're listening. When pain is honored, it softens. Not instantly, but reliably. It stops screaming because it's finally been heard. This is how transformation becomes humane instead of heroic. You're not conquering yourself. You're cooperating with your inner signals. That cooperation builds wholeness from the inside out. And as pain loses its role as a punisher, you'll notice something unsettling. Distraction starts losing its grip on you. Distraction isn't accidental. It's strategic. It steps in the moment truth gets uncomfortable. Noise, screens, busy schedules, endless content. All of it promises relief without responsibility. Distraction keeps you moving so you don't have to feel. It fills every gap where self-awareness might emerge. That's why silence feels threatening at first. Silence removes the buffer. And without the buffer, you meet yourself. For many people, that's the real fear. Truth asks you to slow down. Distraction lets you speed past meaning. Truth says, "Look here." Distraction says, "Not now." And not now slowly becomes never. This is how identity drifts without intention. You consume instead of reflect. You react instead of choose. The soul waits patiently while attention is outsourced, but it never stops calling. Notice how distraction shows up when something matters. Right before a hard conversation, right after a moment of sadness, right when you're about to sit alone with your thoughts. Your hand reaches for the phone automatically, not because you're weak, because you're trained. Modern life rewards distraction aggressively, but wholeness demands presence, and presence feels raw at first, like standing without armor. Here's a practical reset you can try this week. Create one daily truth window. 10 minutes, same time, same place. No phone, no input, no fixing. Just sit and notice what surfaces. Thoughts will race, emotions will rise. That's not failure, that's detox. Write down what keeps repeating. Repetition is the soul's highlighter. That's where attention belongs. Distraction promises comfort but delivers distance. Distance from feeling, distance from clarity, distance from yourself. When you reduce distraction, truth doesn't attack you. It introduces itself gently. You start seeing patterns instead of chaos, choices instead of compulsions. That's when transformation becomes practical, not mystical, usable. Most people think distraction protects them from pain. In reality, it delays healing. The truth you're avoiding isn't trying to break you. It's trying to free you from fragmentation. And once distraction loosens its grip, you feel more grounded, not exposed, more stable, not shaken. Because now you're present in your own life. And that presence requires something rare, the courage to be radically honest. Wholeness isn't comfortable, it's courageous. Not the loud, dramatic kind of courage, the quiet kind that tells the truth when no one is watching. It takes nerve to stop performing and start being honest, to admit you don't have it all figured out, to face parts of yourself you've been editing for years. Most people don't lack intelligence or opportunity. They lack the courage to be real, Because being real removes excuses, and excuses feel safer than responsibility. Courage shows up in ordinary moments, choosing honesty over harmony, depth over approval, alignment over appearance. It's saying no without over-explaining. It's allowing yourself to disappoint others to stay whole. This kind of courage threatens the mask. It exposes the shadow. It invites self-awareness to take the wheel. And once that happens, there's no going back. You can feel this courage growing when you stop outsourcing decisions, when you pause before reacting, when you ask, is this aligned with who I am becoming? That question changes behavior fast. It turns habits into choices. It transforms identity from inherited to intentional. This is how integration becomes lived, not theoretical. You're no longer split between image and instinct. You're moving as one, and that feels powerful. Here's a concrete way to train this courage. Pick one value you care about deeply: honesty, growth, freedom. Then design one weekly action that proves it. If honesty matters, speak one uncomfortable truth kindly. If growth matters, invest time in learning. The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho is a gentle start. If freedom matters, remove one obligation that drains you. Courage strengthens through action, not intention. Small acts, repeated, reshape identity. That's how wholeness stops being abstract. It becomes embodied. The irony is this: courage doesn't make life harder. It simplifies it. When you're whole, you stop negotiating with yourself. Your energy returns because it's no longer split. You feel grounded, clear, present. This is what people call confidence, but it's deeper than that. It's coherence. And once you experience coherence, fragmentation feels unbearable. You start sensing when something is off immediately, because now your soul has a voice. But courage has one final test. Not in action, in surrender. Because eventually, life forces stillness. A pause you didn't plan for, and in that pause, something speaks louder than effort. The soul itself steps forward, not asking for bravery, but for listening. And that's where the final threshold waits. There comes a moment when effort stops working. Not because you failed, but because effort was never the solution. Life creates a pause you didn't schedule. Burnout, loss, emptiness, or a strange quiet after achievement. The old strategies don't bring relief anymore. Distraction feels thin, the mask feels heavy, and for the first time, you can't outrun yourself. This isn't punishment. It's an invitation you've postponed for years. This moment feels uncomfortable because control dissolves. You can't think your way out of it. You can't optimize it. You can't perform your way back to comfort. The soul doesn't respond to force, only to attention. That's why this phase often feels disorienting. Your identity built on doing starts collapsing, and what remains is being. Most people panic here and rush to rebuild the old life, but this pause is sacred ground. When the soul speaks, it doesn't use language. It uses clarity. You suddenly see patterns you couldn't before. Why certain relationships drained you. Why some goals felt empty once achieved. Why you kept repeating the same cycles. This isn't self-criticism. It's integration happening in real time. You're no longer split between instinct and image. For the first time, you feel aligned without effort. That's wholeness beginning to stabilize. Here's how to meet this moment wisely. Don't rush to fill the silence. Create space instead of solutions. Walk without headphones. Write without an agenda. Let questions exist without answers. Read slowly. Man and His Symbols by Jung is challenging but grounding here. Not to understand everything, but to respect depth. The soul doesn't want productivity. It wants presence. You'll notice something subtle but powerful. Your decisions become quieter and clearer. You stop asking what looks right. You start asking what feels true. That shift changes how you choose work, relationships, boundaries. Not dramatically, decisively. You don't need motivation anymore. Alignment generates its own energy. This is what people mistake for enlightenment. It's actually integration made practical. Most people never reach this moment consciously. They numb it, label it a crisis, or rush past it. But if you stay, really stay, something irreversible happens. You stop needing permission to be yourself. You stop negotiating with your inner world. You become whole not because life is perfect, but because you're no longer divided against yourself. And once that happens, you realize something quietly radical. This wasn't the end of the journey. It was the point where your life finally began. Now comes the part most people skip: application. Insight without action is just entertainment for the mind. So ask yourself honestly, where are you still divided? Where are you choosing comfort over truth, distraction over presence, performance over self-awareness? Wholeness isn't a dramatic breakthrough. It's a series of small, courageous alignments. One honest conversation, one boundary respected, one moment of listening instead of running. That's how integration moves from idea to identity. Let this knowledge change how you live, not just how you think. Pay attention to what drains you and what grounds you. Notice when your body tightens and when it relaxes. Those signals are not random. They're guidance. You don't need to become someone new. You need to stop abandoning who you already are. And that decision, repeated daily, reshapes an entire life. So here's the real question. And don't answer it lightly. What part of yourself are you still avoiding? What truth keeps returning because it hasn't been heard yet? And what would change if you stopped running and started integrating? If this stirred something in you, that's not coincidence. That's your soul recognizing itself. If you want to keep walking this path toward clarity, depth, and wholeness, subscribe to Mind's Silent Echo and turn on notifications. This channel exists to explore the inner work most people never do, but desperately need.